Welcome to the presentation from my side. And my name is Quanxing Wan, and I'm a fourth-year PhD student from Wageningen University. And my supervisors are Magdalena, Benjamin, and Lammert from Wageningen University and GFZ, Potsdam, Germany. The title of this presentation is From the Lab to the Farm, Quantifying Factors Influencing Temperature Measurements from Miniaturized Thermal Cameras. So basically, there will be two parts in this two parts of contents in this presentation. So firstly, I would like to introduce some background information to you of my first chapter of my PhD project, which is about the indoor calibration of the thermal sensors. And the second part is the major part of this presentation, which is about the field practices of applying the thermal cameras for further applications. So now I'm going to introduce some interesting background to you. So as you can see from this slide, I have some sample images from the indoor experiments. So in the indoor parts of my work, I have tested several influencing factors influence on the thermal temperature measurements. More or less, we quantified the influencing factors influence on the accuracy of those devices. So basically, we have tested one UAV-based thermal camera, which is named WIRIS second generation, and one handheld thermal camera from FLIR. And since we are in the indoor temperature controlled environment, so it's easier to for quantifying all the factors. And against both sensors, we have used a black body calibrator from Germany, and there are two temperatures. There were two temperatures tested, which are 35 and 55 degrees. And so now you can see we have four subsections, which are treating the influences from the sensor temperature itself, and also for testing the stabilization time for both sensors. And also we have used several external devices to test the measuring distances influence and the wind and heating effects of the thermal to the thermal cameras. So as you can see from this slide, we have several results introduced. So for 4 sections, we have made several conclusions. So basically, to not go too deep into the details, our conclusions are that we need more or less 30 minutes to 60 minutes for the thermal cameras to stabilize before it can be actually used for further applications. This conclusion is a bit different from previous conclusions from other researchers. Normally, people suggest 10 to 20 minutes, but we found that the signals will not be stabilized before the first half an hour at least. So that's the first conclusion. And then we also found that the ambient temperature influence is quite large, as you can see from the middle left figure. So then in the end, when the ambient temperature is changing quite much, the sensor temperature itself might also change a lot. And in the end, the temperature measurements might differ like for more than 10 degrees from the original measurements. And also the measuring distance results in a large difference to the measurements as well. And in the end, since we also use the fan and also the heating gun for testing, for mimicking the solar radiation and wind influence outside, we also found these two factors might influence the temperature a lot. It's also normally, let's say for more than 5 to 10 degrees. Okay, then I finished my indoor part, and now we can move to the outdoor part of the thermal sensor calibration. So in this part, we have introduced different targets. So in the indoor experiments, we use the black body as a target, and now we have used several self-prepared temperature reference materials for the calibration outside. So in this part, we have several objectives. So the major one would be to calibrate the thermal cameras by introducing a series of our self-prepared reference materials for helping out detecting crop order stress at different crop growth stages of maize in the end. So let's move on to the detailed methods. So firstly, this research has been conducted in the Netherlands, in Wageningen University, and we have a relatively large experimental site. So in the end, since our next research question is to test the water stress, to detect the water stress. So we need to use the whole field in the end. But before the actual application like that, we have already placed several reference materials, as you can see from the bottom left, in between different field plots in the end, to enable the hovering mode of UAV flights above the materials. So now you can see several pictures from our field campaigns. We have used the one single UAV from DJI, which is the model of M210, and we have two sensors mounted on the drone. One is thermal and the other one is multispectral. And apart from that, as you can see from the middle, the picture in the middle, we have different self-prepared materials I will introduce in the next page of the detailed information. And apart from these materials, we also have the different thermocouples for measuring the temperature on the ground for those materials to be compared with the UAV measured temperature. And apart from that, we also have like different weather data provided by the neighboring weather station. So that's it for the pictures. And then this is an overview of all the campaigns last year in the spring and the summer seasons. So basically, the first half of the flight campaigns will be used for this research question, which is directly related to this presentation. So I will show you some results out of these campaigns in the spring and summer seasons. And next is to this slide. I can introduce some basic information regarding how I convert the original temperature readings from the thermal cameras to the calibrated temperature readings to be actually used for analysis. So for both two sensors, we need to convert from dm values to temperature, and these formulas are for instance, for FLIR, this formula is not really easily found online, and I think the conversion is normally encrypted, and you need to use specific software provided by FLIR to enable the calculation. But for some other models, it's easier to find the formula. So that's kind of practical information for your convenience later. And since for thermal sensing, emissivity is quite an important part for the quantitative research. So before actually using the temperature values, we also did emissivity correction according to some emissivity library, which are freely available from the internet. And so I set different values to different materials to correct the emissivity for further applications, as you can see from this slide. So now this slide will be an important slide for introducing the basic details of the field campaign to you. So basically in this field practice, I have used 6 different materials on the ground for calibrating the sensors. So to list one by one, firstly, I have 2 fixed emissivity materials. For these 2 materials, you can see from the presentation. So now I have a series of images collected by the drone, and the upper ones are the fixed emissivity materials. Sorry, the upright one is the fixed emissivity material, as you can see with a red dot. So it's quite a big size, and it's then in the end it can give us enough pixels for generating the statistics. And apart from, so for this fixed emissivity material, we have used a specific thermographic spray paint from Czech Republic to make sure that during the whole field campaigns, the emissivity value can stay stable. And apart from that, we also have the high value, the objects with very high temperature values and with very low temperature values. So firstly, for the high temperature material, we used a slow cooker with warm water inside, and the temperature is stabilized at around 50 degrees. And for the cold object, we used a box with cold water with ice inside to make sure the temperature is closer to 0 degrees. And apart from the above mentioned materials, we also used 1 soil sample and 1 sand sample, and the temperature of these materials is normally in the middle compared to other materials. Okay, and so for actually analyzing the images, I need to circle out the region of interest for those materials. So I need to use the central pixels for all these materials, not the boundary pixels. So in the end, as you can see from the left picture, I have these examples. And apart from that, now I think hopefully the basic information is more or less clearly explained. And now I have some results from the ground measurements. So as you can see from this slide, I have presented the temperature measurements from the thermocouples for those materials. And you can see this is a very bright weather, so with very few clouds, and the temperature measurements for the fixed emissivity materials are very high, even can achieve 60-something degrees. And So in the end, these measurements from the fixed emissivity materials have very high contrast to the low temperature objects, as you can see from the blue curve, which represents the water sample. So in the end, when you have such a high contrast of the temperature values from different objects, it's easier for you to calibrate your thermal sensor outside. And as you can see from the next slide now, we have an example from a cloudy weather. And you can see that for the overcast weather conditions, then the temperature values of all the measurements are going down. This slide is regarding a compare from the neighboring day compared to the previous day. So the air temperature, the background temperature is similar in between these two campaigns. Okay, and now there are some interesting results coming for this outdoor practice. So for this outdoor field campaign, we would like to test several influencing factors influence on the measurements, and these slides will be regarding the flight heights influence on the measurements. So we have since we have used two camera models, and now I can introduce you some results from the first camera model, WIRIS. So for these plots, you can see as the measuring distance increases, then the R square decreases gradually, and so between the ground measurement and the UAV measurement, and then the slope also decreases, which means the temperature values in the high temperature region is more or less underestimated, and for the low temperature region, it's not that underestimated. And the interception to the y-axis also can refer to the difference to the actual 1-to-1 line, which means if it's closer to the 1-to-1 line, then it means that the temperature measurement accuracy is higher. So for this slide, the information is already regarding the results after the emissivity correction, and this slide includes all the materials which have been used in this campaign. And the next slide, you can see that one material is disappearing. So that is the soil sample. So we can make the conclusion that after removing the soil sample, the correlation, the fitting curve, the fitting degree is much more improved. And if we go back, then you can see that the soil sample, the temperature measurements for the soil samples are very much overestimated. And then for the next sensor from FLIR, we can also see that we can draw similar conclusions compared to the previous sensor. The only big difference is that the absolute values, the UAV measured absolute values are much deviated from the 1-to-1 line, which means that all the measurements are underestimated a lot for more than 10 degrees. And then when you remove the soil samples, then the fitting degree is also very much improved. And then this now we come to another fieldwork day, and this is still for the first sensor, for the WIRIS sensor. As you can see here, we have included one more fixed emissivity material, which was not included in the previous slides. So for the upper parts, if you can see my mouse, then the orange and the blue dots refer to the fixed emissivity material measurements. You can see for these materials, they perform very well in this correlation compared to other materials. And still, after removing the soil samples, then we also have very strong correlation. Okay, and I think I've used several more minutes than expected for the introduction. So for this research is still since it's still ongoing. So the results are more or less preliminary results in this section, and as you can see that we have the flight height influence is quite much outside in the field campaigns. The results are more or less also comparable to the distance effects influence for our indoor experiments. So then it means that in the end, if for actual practices for whatever applications, it's very crucial to conduct some user-defined calibration models apart from the provided manufacturer's calibration models. Otherwise, you will receive very deviated temperature measurements from any of your thermal sensors. And apart from that, I need to conclude that emissivity correction is also very important for UAV thermal measurements. Normally, for the previous research, not all the researchers have corrected this parameter before actual applications in the agricultural or forestry domains. So this is also important. And then lastly, it's always nice to test multiple sources of error properly before quantitative applications of thermal cameras. So those are my biggest 3 conclusions from this presentation. And since there are still many details are not very well elaborated, so I'm ready for the questions from your side.